Alright, now this is where we start ending 2019 and slowly pulling our way into 2020, and obviously there's going to be that area of the January releases coming. Some of them look shockingly promising for January anyway, by their standards, and sometimes we're going to get stuff like The Grudge, obviously. So, but before we go into that and into 2020, we're going to go into a couple of, one very much an awards contender and one potential awards contender. And of course, we want to start with the big one with 1917. And before I even say anything at all, I heard an incredible comparison yesterday that I'm surprised hadn't occurred to me before, where somebody I knew said that what the thin red line was to Saving Private Ryan is what 1917 is to Dunkirk, where Dunkirk kind of puts you right into the whole thing, and it was like non-stop, and there was all the action and all the sound was incredible and stuff like that, and it just really put you in the intensity of that. And 1917 also has that, but it's a bit more maybe contemplative than what Dunkirk was doing. So, in one of the ways they go about putting us right there, where Nolan had his own way of doing it in Dunkirk, Sam Mendes has gone this route of doing the make it all look like one take thing that has been discussed to death at this point, but obviously needs brought up. And from what I had heard, it was something like they would do, because there's the whole Birdman comparison, and to my understanding, I don't think the takes in this were necessarily as long as the takes in Birdman. I had heard that it was something like 8-minute takes that were spliced together, for the most part very seamlessly, and like it's to the point where you can, in some cases, obviously not all of them I imagine, but in some cases you can definitely tell where there's edits, and there's one particular case kind of in the middle where but where it is very obvious, but the way it doesn't break from that whole immersive thing by doing the one-take thing is that in those moments where you can notice, like, oh, there was probably an edit there, it is like, it's sort of like when they still had film projectors and you would see the reel changes, the black dots in the right corner, and it's like you would see that and it would register with you, but then as the movie kept going, you just completely forgot about it again. The whole thing they talk about in Fight Club. That's pretty much what, when you notice the edit, that's pretty much all it feels like. There's nothing really that like takes you out of the whole immersive thing, even when you can tell that's happening and when the sort of trickery is happening, I suppose. So, and I do think I've been one of the first people, like I will be one of the first people to criticize the whole one-take thing if it feels like a gimmick. But the thing is this is kind of the perfect way to approach a movie like this in kind of a new way, because there's so much, especially like the way that it suits the story itself, I think, is one of the reasons it works so well. Because you've got the whole mission of Colin Firth telling them they need to deliver a message to about 8 or 9 miles down the way, I think they say, and to stop this attack from happening because it's a trap. And the fact that it's like we see it as basically one like long trail, more or less, that's just going through all these different battlegrounds and scenarios and potential, traps set by people that were there previously. And that is a really effective way to do that, not just for the whole, immersion factor and to make you feel like you're there, almost seem like it's like there's one case when towards the beginning when it really sets in what exactly is the point of Mendes doing this, and it's when and Deakins, who obviously can't go unacknowledged, where we're for a while in this opening segment we're watching them like go through the trench, and you kind of think, you're thinking like, oh, like an homage to where it's like this is reminding me of Kirk Douglas in the trench in Path of Glory, so that's brings back memories of that in another movie in another very familiar director style. But then it's the moment when they come out of the trench, and then we see, like, that, you immediately get that sense of obviously we've got our two main characters here in front of the camera, but it's like this is basically the next best thing to this movie happening and entirely in first person perspective. And it's like it almost might as well be, but they handle it in a way that's it you don't really if it I guess it's one of those cases of it just depends on the viewer where it's like if it's gonna work in that way or if you're just gonna see it as a gimmick. But I think I can see most people really going for the being pulled in by this, but it is one of those things where it's either going to work for you or it isn't. And but because there's also things where you would think in this, age of seeing all the behind the scenes stuff and knowing all the tricks and stuff like that and being able to identify like where the edits are, that there's not much else people can get away with. Where I remember when Inception came out at the time, there were a number of sequences where it's like, I don't even want to watch a behind the scenes reel because I don't want to know. I don't want to take the magic away. And then I said the same thing when The Revenant came out about the bear attack. And it's this also has a couple of those moments. The only problem is I have the benefit of doing the whole I haven't watched a trailer before a movie came out since 2013. And I heard a lot of the complaints about the movie is that all the money shots are in the trailers. So I was going into this not knowing any of those money shots, which is great. So I mean him running across the battlefield I'd seen like in stills, but not the actual shot itself. So in one shot I was really disappointed to hear was apparently in all the advertisements was the scene following the... Well, first off, it's amazing enough that, especially in Dunkirk, we have, and also going back to all the World War II movies of the 40s that all came out like at once, dogfighting scenes are very, popular in war movies, and it was so interesting to see an entire dogfight take place from the ground, and that just felt like such a unique thing to see in a war movie. And then this moment of one of those planes coming down and there is a person still alive in it and we're not breaking this one shot thing, and it's like stuff like that I can't really fathom how that was pulled off. And I love that we can still go into movies. We're fresh into 2020 and we can still go into movies not knowing too much about some of the movie magic stuff still, no matter how much you look into it, and I think that's, like, amazing. Like, I had heard something about, I think, Inarritu was approached by actual, like, big-name directors that were asking him how he did the bear scene in The Revenant, and it's like that you can still make stuff like that happen, and that movies like this can still show that off, is really fantastic. And there's also the stuff when they just kind of... I had read something where George Mackay had done an interview or something, and he was talking about that run across the battlefield. And there's the idea of... I mean, there is the one thing where it's like, if the take has been long enough, you may just not want to go back. But I don't feel like there's any particular, throwaway decision like that made here. Because there are a couple of moments when he's running across the battlefield while all these, 1,600 plus people are coming out and going out into the field. And there are a couple of times where he runs into people and gets knocked over. And it's like, I assume it was planned, like I think it was planned that it was just going to be one, great, magnificent, movie-like shot of this one person running perpendicular to these 1,600 people. And it was just going to be straight across. But I love, like, the reality of it, like the uncleanness of it, that he runs into a couple of people. And the fact that they decided to keep that, I think, really brings out the kind of detail in this movie, whether intentional or not, is going to be the kind of stuff that really stands out in this movie. And there's also stuff like the stuff you don't see in other movies that's also not as, like, blatant. Like when there's a moment when they're in the back of the truck before they get stuck in the mud. And you're looking at all these other guys, and they look like kids. They look so disturbingly young to be in this environment. It's like, you hear about that stuff all the time, like in history books, but I don't feel like it's all that common. It's like, the only example I can really think of is Lawrence Fishburne in Apocalypse Now. But like apart from that, it's you don't really see just like how young some of the faces were like in those scenarios in movies like this. So that was really kind of jarring to see in a really effective way. And then, of course, eventually we get to a point where the sun goes down and Deacons just basically Deacons just gets to show off. I mean, you could say the one take thing is like he and Mendez doing that through the whole movie, but I mean, in this case in particular, and Deacons is, by the way, that's not an insult. This is Deacons is the kind of cinematographer that has earned the right to show off whenever he pleases because we all benefit. And these scenes that are reminiscent of some of the other shots he's gotten, like seeing fire against the night is a big player in this really magnificent sequence in the middle, towards the end of the middle, I guess you could say it is. And you've also got the flares going off like all at once, and it's really spectacular. Even if, like I said, it almost feels like they're just all the technical people are just showing off at this point and saying this is just what we can do. It's still it still works anyway. It's still just as effective. And then there's also stuff as far as like I had heard a lot of complaints when it was still in like its limited release that there was like a lack of focus on story and character because it was so focused on the technical aspects of it. But there are moments here that do really work and stand out. Like Andrew Scott's character in particular stands out towards the beginning when we meet him, and he's like, when we see them going through the trench, you imagine like it's clear that this is like a very lived-in environment when we're going through it, and that comes through all the more when we see Andrew Scott's character, and the first thing he says to them is, "So what day is it? We all have bets on what day it is right now," and it turns out that they all guessed wrong, and there's little lines in there also that are like lines that are more clever than you would expect, being potential throwaway lines in just a movie like this. This does seem more focused on its technical aspects, and so that's probably going to be an underrated aspect of it. I said the same thing about Saving Private Ryan, where a lot of people say Saving Private Ryan peaks after its first half hour, but it's like there's some good stuff, particularly in the writing, that tends to go overlooked throughout that movie, and I think this is going to fall into that same category. And there's also stuff that they bring in that's like it's stuff that they incorporate that you don't and it just seems like throwaway things, but they incorporate in a way later that you would never even really think about. Like there's a moment where George Michael's character finds milk, and it's like because he's run out of water at this point. So you think that's the main takeaway from this, and then it's not like an overly triumphant thing or this overly giant deal, but it's like the fact that the way that milk comes in handy later is just interesting how it managed to come back in that way, and with kind of such a small introduction to it in a way that we already figured the instance that it played a part in this, but there's like just one more moment where it's like, oh, I had no idea that was going to come back, but there it is. So yeah, but I can probably get some criticisms like the whole idea of the great aspect of it is just the realism of it. Like that's the whole point, is to like put you right there. But there's also cases where because viewers lately are so obsessed with realism now to the point that it's got to be down to like every little detail, and it's in cases like this where it's like with the one take thing and the stuff that they go through, there are going to be, like, dull moments where just not a lot is happening, where they're just kind of walking. And that's the thing is, you want to praise that because that's part of the experience. Like, that's the whole thing of, yeah, if this is, like, a practically first-person perspective sort of thing, where it feels like you're right there with them, yeah, obviously there's going to be those mundane times where nothing's happening. That's pretty much what Jarhead was about, was just the fact that you can go to war and just nothing will happen, and you're just stuck in the mundane. But then, at the same time, it is like, how much do you want to do that? Because it is like, because there is a separation. Like, I know people love the realism details and stuff like that, but I still feel strongly that we do draw the line between movie and documentary. And it's like, if one is a movie, regardless of how the whole idea is it feeling as realistic as possible and stuff like that. But yeah, so there are those dull moments that you can appreciate as to why they're there, and the fact that it is about the immersive experience, but nevertheless can still be dull moments. They're few and far between for sure. But in and given that this is kind of a sensitive project because it comes from such a personal place in Mendez, because what was it, his grandfather like relayed these stories to him, and there's the dedication at the end as well. And so there are things in there that it's like you kind of want to criticize, but there's always something that kind of brings you back and says like it is there for a purpose. So that's conflicting, but all in all, it is obviously this massive technical achievement, and it's easy to see. Like, I feel like it's one of those cases where even if you don't like the movie, surely you're sitting in the theater going, I get the praise. I get why this movie is a big deal. And once again, if you can reach that, and like I said, you can pull off scenes like, the whole dogfight and the aftermath of it, and still have those moments this far into the life of movies in general to make people say, how did they do that? Obviously something is going very, very right. So that's pretty much how I felt about that going in. It is something I would like to see a second time, if that opportunity should come. So, yes. Now we're going to go into, hopefully that rain isn't too loud. It was even worse earlier. Now we're going to go into Just Mercy, which is a racially charged legal drama from Destin Daniel Cretton, the director of Short Term 12. And when you hear racially charged courtroom drama based on a true story, you probably imagine a lot of liberties are going to be taken, a lot of stuff is going to be really watered down, there's going to be some overbearing music, and it's going to be really, really safe. That is not too far from the truth, but I do think, just as a general note before we go into the specifics, that Just Mercy is above a lot of the movies we've seen like that lately. And there is some stuff that it might go into a little more harshly that some of the other stuff kind of tried to stay away from because they were trying to be safe, more or less. Stuff like the Rockwell movie from earlier this year, The Best of Enemies, the one with him and Taraji, is stuff like that. I do think this is probably more comparable, especially since the stories are so similar, is Marshall, with Chadwick Boseman from a couple years ago, which was surprisingly better than I thought it would be, even if it still kind of fell into the whole safe category for the most part. There is something here, and I think it's the characters that drive this the most, particularly, and the performances that come with them, with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx, and Rob Morgan has a really great part in this also. And this opening scene, though, where Jamie Foxx establishes so much, just being in a scene pretty much by himself, where he just comes off as this ordinary dude who's just doing what he does and just going about his everyday life. And then there's this great shot when he's coming home, and the camera just stays on him, and it just looks like an average shot of him just driving home, just living his mundane life. And then we see the lights start to reflect off his face, and we see his face drop, and then we see the lights reflecting against his face, and then he's arrested for a crime that he was pretty much nowhere near, and then put on death row for it. So the interesting thing about this, though, is that this is a movie with two opening scenes before we get the title. We get that Jamie Foxx opening, and then we also get the Michael B. Jordan opening. And I like that they didn't really separate those as, like, one's the opening scene and then the rest is the movie. I like that they established both characters before we get the title and the movie officially starts. And we get this nice opening with Michael B. Jordan with another client. And it's one of those cases where he walks in and they, discuss things, and he's like, your execution date has been, they're not gonna give you a date at least for another year, so you have that year before we even have to deal with that. And the guy is so relieved and says okay, because I didn't want my family to be here while I had a date, so I've got a whole year for them to be able to come in and out. And it's this really beautiful emotional moment, and then it cuts, and it's the two of them just kind of sitting down and being like, just kind of bullshitting with each other, and just having like this really human moment between the two of them where they're not even talking about what's going on or the case or anything like that. They're just talking to each other about each other, and it's this, and it really shows off the humanity of the guy that Jordan is playing, and how he sort of, this really human approach he took to his clients, and it wasn't just well, yeah, it's my job to, to get you out of this, so I'm just going to do my job, and that'll be the end of it. And that personal touch goes way into the way he handles the Jamie Foxx case, and the way he spends time with his family and all that stuff, and it really sets that up in a really nice way. And like I said, all of this is pre-title, and then we get the title, and then the movie goes on. So that's a really good setup. And and the thing about it is that obviously there's a lot to be said about the things that the real life character Brian that Jordan is playing, and all the things that he did, but there's also the way Jordan plays him in some of these particular scenes, and the way they sort of shape the character and show off sides of him. Because in another movie, with a character, with a real life person with that kind of reputation, it would have been very easy to just play them up as like a stoic figure and nothing else. And there's this scene towards the beginning when he's going in to talk to Jamie Foxx, and they say, and he walks in, he's got his suit, and he's got all the dignity in the world. He's like got that confidence, and he's like, I'm here to. He does take that, the whole I'm here to do the job thing that he has to do with the people around his clients to get in, when he can be more human with them once he's in there. But he's doing the very professional thing up to this point. And then they just say, completely stone-faced, alright, but you gotta go in here because we're gonna strip search you. It doesn't matter who you are. And they just literally strip him of his dignity in this moment. And then they imply that they want to search further just for the sake of humiliation and degradation, and then they say, alright, just put your clothes on. And it's clear in this moment that this is not protocol, obviously. So the moments like that like really show the down places that the hero was in also. Who should be the stoic figure in this case was also brought down in certain ways like that, and went through that degradation also just because they were trying to help these people who, in some cases, may be totally and completely innocent, like the Fox character. So then this is when we get a really good look at what Fox is going to be doing in this movie. And there's, because obviously there's time that passes between when we see him in the opening scene and then Jordan's first meeting with him, where he's been in here for a while, and he's on death row, he's set to be executed, all that stuff. And it's like when you see Fox in the opening scenes, he's like, he just comes off like really calm and really patient, especially when he's talking to the cop. And it's like there's nothing, over the top about this at all. And then you take that calm and patient demeanor, and then by the time Jordan is interviewing him for the first time or talking to him for the first time, it's like he's a lot more testy, and he's basically done with the idea of any kind of hope at this point. And it's like to kind of see the contrast in that just between these first two scenes with him, kind of says so much about what happened in between. And some people can probably, want to see that in between for sure. But the movie is 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it's like there are certain things I want to focus on, and the way they focus on the Jordan character is kind of the main aspect of this. But the what's great about not just the Fox scenes, but those scenes in general inside, where the other prisoners like Rob Morgan and O'Shea Jackson Jr. and the attention that they get also is something that I really liked, in the way that the movie could have easily just focused on Fox and nothing else, and we wouldn't maybe even see anything in there, or like just see, random faceless inmates or whatever. But the fact that we kind of got a little something from at least this handful of people, kind of felt like we were getting more of a view of it than we usually would in a movie that was playing it even more safe and had a more narrow focus. I said there's always room to make the focus greater in movies like this, but it's like as long as we're expanding more and more as we go, and the way the movie handles what it does go after is handled well. So, and there's, as far as Fox goes, there is like the whole thing where there's one scene towards the end with him and Michael B. Jordan just talking to each other, and it's like he is really good. Fox is like really good in this, and it's like even being an Oscar-winning actor, you still sometimes forget just how good of an actor he is. And here he really gets to show that off. There in this scene in particular with Jordan, it was like I can so see this being his SAG clip next Sunday. Uh, and it's like I honestly, I mean, I don't think he's gonna get the Oscar nomination, but I really wouldn't be surprised, especially after that scene. And in that scene I'm talking about, where it's like it's great for an awards clip. It could potentially get him greater award success, nomination wise. But it's like it's not an overblown scene. It's not him being over the top. It's not him being shouty. It's just him speaking. But there's like so much in that, and so much emotion behind it, and so much like wisdom, where we can sense in this moment like what he's seen and where he's been and where he is now versus where he was in that opening scene, and it's like it feels like it's all sort of here, and so scenes like that really work. And then there's also the subplot with Tim Blake Nelson, the person that basically the whole thing hinges on, like the whole Fox's whole case hinges on things that Tim Blake Nelson said that may or may not be true, and things that he may have been pressured to say by the cops at the time or whatever. And a lot of stuff we went into, what they went into when we saw When They See Us as well, kind of bleeds into this as well, even despite being in not too distant time, actually almost right around this time period, but it's yeah, the movie feels like it's in an older time period than it actually is because of the Alabama setting. Where it almost, like there's moments where you may almost forget it's like kind of not in that sort of 50s era. And there's the whole irony of everybody's praising that the movie takes place and where To Kill a Mockingbird is set, and it's like you see all the whole idea of To Kill a Mockingbird and what it was saying versus the way the people in this town actually act towards people like Fox's character. It's there's some, I guess, gallows humor in that, and through all this also there's every now and then there's like just those little moments that just really work and mean something, even if they're just like very much in passing. There's one moment during a montage that I thought really stood out. And it's just a regular montage. It's them saying like, "Hey, we're looking to reopen Jamie Foxx's case, and you have information. Would you like to?" And they slam the door in his face. And it's basically just that with the music playing and all that, the montage music playing, and he's getting doors slammed in his face. Brie Larson's getting doors slammed in her face, and then there's this kind of nice moment when he approaches a guy and he's talking to him, and we think the exact same thing is going to happen, and the guy backs up, and we think he's backing up to slam the door in his face, and he's like letting him inside to talk to him and give him information, and it's like, and I think the reason that stands out is because it's in the middle of the montage. It's like in the middle of doors getting slammed in their faces, so it's like kind of like this nice little unexpected moment there. So I like the stuff like that as well, and then every now and then, like I said, not near as much as they probably should, but every now and then there's moments where they really like hit about as emotionally as they possibly can, and there is. I wouldn't. This isn't really spoilery because it's in the middle of the movie. But if you don't know the history, I suppose this would be spoilery. But in the middle of the movie, there is an execution scene, and this scene in particular, we see like the whole build up to it, and then we see the whole sort of process and everything, and then kind of the emotional aftermath of it. And this whole sequence in itself is like really incredibly shattering. Like there's like a number of movies that have execution scenes like this that are amazing, like Dead Man Walking, Monsters Ball, Changeling, Capote, and it's like the way they build up the dread of that, where you kind of feel in your stomach, just seeing the whole process play out pretty much from beginning to end. It's just really harrowing and unsettling, and those are examples of movies that did it in an amazing way and reached that effect pretty much to its full potential. And this is pretty much on par with the scenes in those movies as well. And that's how good this sequence is, and how much they really go for the emotional peak of it. And it's moments like this that make you look at the rest of the movie, because there is like it is weird how much of this movie is kind of deliberate in its pacing, and then it is weird. Like the last 15 minutes are suddenly like feel really rushed. And you talk about some of the stuff that might seem like it's missing, or the stuff that would hit harder, or the stuff that they're straying away from because they're afraid of their audience or something. And so it is one of those cases where you watch a movie like this and you see like you can tell when they're watering it down or when they're not quite going the distance they probably could be or should be, and it leaves you with that question of, well, if you want to tackle this material but you're kind of afraid of the material too, it's like, why are you bothering exactly if you're not going to go like all the way? And it's because I suppose, obviously you can find successful stuff like Green Book, but then you also get like most of the time it ends up like stuff like The Best of Enemies, where it's like a movie nobody cares about, that hardly anybody sees, and when they do, they'll probably forget about it anyway. And the people that should see it definitely won't. So like the people that's message it's geared towards, it's like these are the people that need to change, and this is the change we need to see. The people who are going to see this movie are probably already there to some extent, at least mentally. And it's like the people that really need to like see the horrors of like the backward thinking, they are not going to see this movie or movies like Green Book or The Best of Enemies or anything like that. So it's it's a tough area, I get, as far as like the business aspect of the movie business goes. But yeah, and you could say it's like awards bait and stuff like that. But I do think Just Mercy did just a little more and hits just a little harder than the usual sort of, churning out of movies like this. So it does have that going for it, but it does always leave you sort of wanting it to hit just a little harder in certain places, and it's going to be too safe for that. So there's that. But I am like fine with it overall, at least as far as being a movie goes. So let's go into 2020 and start with The Grudge. There's always the very promising start to January with the horror movie that was dumped here. And like I talked about a couple of times in that Worst of the Year video I just did, yes, this is another movie where they take a famous director's name that everybody loves and plaster it all over the place as if this person had anything to do with anything and try to sell it like that. So this is really not much of a Sam Raimi movie. But the thing about this movie, though, is that the things I had heard going into it, because it came out like last week, and the things I had heard had my expectations so incredibly low that it wasn't near. I mean, it's bad and it's very poorly put together. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of it missing, but it wasn't the disaster I was expecting it to be, by any means, judging by what I had heard. And maybe I can simply credit that to the bar being to the floor. But so yeah. So first of all, so I just want to start off by saying I don't think it's that bad, but there's plenty of shit to talk about as to why it's bad. So I'm pretty sure I already got my point across. With the I did a video a few months ago about Ju-on and then the 2004 remake with Sarah Michelle Gellar. So in this, obviously it starts with the whole, is this even that necessary thing? Is it a reboot? Is it a remake? What even is it? Is it its own thing? What is going on here? And why is it here? And I don't really know, like, if it's any of those at all. I just have no idea. It's like, it almost eventually comes off like one of those cases of there's so many elements where it's like it's kind of this thing but kind of not, and then they kind of try to throw their own thing into it, but then that doesn't really work either, and it's like, I kind of think whoever was responsible for this wanted to make another movie entirely, and it just kind of eventually got morphed into a Grudge movie. I guess. I don't know. But it's not without effective scenes. Mind you, they are effective scenes that remind you of other movies, but still, they're in there. Like the very first scene with there's a trash bag that's like moving by itself. And there's kind of a creepy element to that, but it in no different way than like you see that, and at first you're like, oh, that's kind of creepy, but then you immediately think, oh, this reminds me of Audition. So the moving bag in Audition, which obviously had a significantly more dramatic and horrifying effect. So there's that. But talking about the other movies also, Ju-on and the remake, it just at least those two, where we have the timeline being fractured, which in those movies, like it's obviously it didn't work near as well in the remake as it did Ju-on. But the thing is in this movie, it's like, oh, we it feels like they're saying, oh, we have to do that because the other movies did, and it feels like they had no particular plan in doing this. I feel like I'm talking about Little Women again already, where it's in The Grudge of all things, where it's like I'm not even sure, like this. Like, you watch Ju-on and you're like, oh man, this is so effective in the way it ties these things together and how it kind of leaves a certain mystery around the horror also, and then it all eventually comes together. And it's like, by the time you're watching it in this movie, you're like, what was the point of the fractured timeline again? Because this movie's completely lost. And so it's like, and the thing is also is like, it jumps around so much that it doesn't even, it's like, it feels like it doesn't even stay on anything long enough to like give it the time to have any sort of effect whatsoever. It's like there's just sort of dull shit happening, and then there's a scare, and then it cuts to something else in a completely different time frame. And that's pretty much what the whole movie is, just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to like, I don't know, 5 different stories. At least that's what it felt like. But, and all these characters. And so many recognizable faces. Andrea Riseborough, John Cho, Damian Bashir, William Sadler, Jackie Weaver, Lynn Shay. You would think with this cast, and these characters are all like these aren't all like actors in one place that we all know and love, and then everybody else is fucking around. And it's like those cases of usually the big problem in horror movies is you've got like these shitty actors who have barely been in anything at all, and they just have to act, you know, surface level scared or whatever. And it's like you've got real names in this, and and it's like you get 2 Oscar nominees. Andrea Riseborough is getting more amazing as she goes. John Cho just had Searching and Columbus before that, and has really shown great dramatic range lately. And they're spread throughout the movie. Like, all the different timelines, they're all, like, we're getting at least one of these people in all these different segments. And it's like, how do you... that's how hard the material fails, that you got a cast like this, and none of it's working. So, but there are a few things that I like tried to credit. Like they're doing the usual tropes, like, you know, it's always obvious when something's gonna pop out or whatever, and we're doing like the nosebleed cliche and stuff like that. But it's like I was trying to give it credit because it was like I was stunned for a while by how much it wasn't using the jump scare noise. Like the jump scares are there, but they're not doing like the loud sound effect. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's unexpected, and it's like good on them for not doing that. Mind you, by the end, this is a totally different story, and they're just beating the holy shit out of any percussion instrument they can find on the soundtrack. But for a while there, it's kind of like they avoided at least the noise aspect of it, which is the cheapest thing about that whole cliche. And so it's like, I mean, there's still those moments where, like, you know, you turn around and just something's there. Even when there's no sound effect, but even then that's, you know, played out after you do it so many times. But then they start to lose it and go that direction right around the time. They try to give Andrea Riseborough, like, her Silence of the Lambs moment where she's, like, in the dark with her gun and there's, like, a thing there or whatever. But, but for a while there it was like, okay, I kind of get where they're going with the style, but then it completely shits the bed by the last half hour or so at least. And then there's just some stuff that happens in between that's like totally inexplicable. Like most of it's just dull shit of like this case they keep talking about, but it's but they don't really. I don't know. Like every time they said case, I really wasn't sure what event in the movie they were talking about, and I think it's supposed to be one case, but I can't tell. So, but then some of the inexplicable stuff, like the ghost girl hanging out with John Cho, uh, where it's like, this whole segment was just like, I don't quite like it got to the point to where it was just confusing, to where I was like, do I even? I thought I knew somewhat what was going on. Do I not even know what's going on anymore? The way he handled this girl was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna try calling your dad. In the meantime, why don't you just stay in this house? It's almost like he knew it was a ghost, and it's like, oh, do you have anybody? Like, should I call the cops or something? It's like, oh, you're probably just you probably just haunt this place, so just stay on the couch for the night, and I'll stay in my place. And that just doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I kept wondering if I was missing stuff, like in the time jumps and all that. But the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking maybe I can give myself the benefit of the doubt and just say this movie makes no goddamn sense. So that's pretty much what's going on here. And then, like I said, the last 15 minutes or so especially are just a fucking nightmare. And not a nightmare in the sense that a horror movie is supposed to be. Just in how poorly made it is, and whatever the fuck is even going on. I don't think the movie even cares. And I don't mind necessarily a horror movie where the plot doesn't matter, where it's just like, the individual moments. Like, if they're effective enough, you could just build a movie on that. Like, just make it inexplicable. Make it have the audience has no idea what's going on. That disorientation could do wonders with the rest of the horror. But the problem is that the horror doesn't work, so so that's gonna draw even more attention to the fact that the rest of the movie makes no fucking sense and there's like no joints connecting here whatsoever. Some of the Lin Shaye stuff can be kind of freaky, I guess, but for the most part, it's just kind of the same old shit, but you can kind of hardly tell. There's so many scenes that are so dark, too. So, it's like, half the time you're not even quite sure what you're looking at, so there's that, too. We're like, which ghost is that, and where did that come from again? I don't know. And it's like, dude, you're so busy trying to figure that out, scares are happening, and you don't even see them. You're just trying to put all the math together in your head. And it's like, oh, shit, the scary stuff is still happening. Oh, wait, who is it happening to now? We've had, like, 2 time jumps since the last time I was even trying to register anything. Oh, well, that's a bummer. And the problem, I think the way you can really outline like what happened here is when you look at the director. And the director made this movie called The Eyes of My Mother, which was like this sort of unconventional black and white horror thing. And when you see the product of this, you're like, yeah, this wasn't. I don't know why they hired a director at all. Because it's like, it is very clear the studio and the producers made this movie. And it's like, and the weird thing about that is, like, you look at a movie like The Eyes of My Mother, and you're like, why that director? Because this was clearly the movie the producers wanted to make, because they clearly did it themselves without the help of a director. Barely a writer, even. And it's like, what is the purpose of getting a director like that and to put on a movie like this? Because the kind of people looking for the kind of horror like The Eyes of My Mother are not going to be the people looking for the horror in a movie like this Grudge, or the other way around. The people that this Grudge was made for are certainly not looking for horror movies like The Eyes of My Mother. So what even is the plan here with that? So, I don't know. That's all this movie is one big giant fucking I don't know. So, I guess we can just leave it at that. So, I think that's going to be it for this one. Next week we're going to have Bad Boys and Doolittle, and the Kristen Stewart fanboy in me is probably going to see Underwater, and I don't know, we'll see what happens with that Tiffany Haddish bullshit. So, and then we'll get through. And like I said, some interesting, not usually January type stuff happening throughout this month, so we'll see what happens, but we started off with The Grudge, so it is definitely January, so we'll see what happens with that. And obviously we'll continue with the award stuff, which is pretty much weekly at this point. So, yeah. So until all of the next stuff, I think that's it.